Imagine an empire that lasted for over 2 millennia, ruling over a quarter of the world's population, and then crumbled from within. An empire where emperors were gods on earth, yet could not save their people from starvation, war, and rebellion. This is the story of Imperial China, once unstoppable, now a cautionary tale of power, corruption, and collapse. China, the land of dragons, dynasties, and unbroken civilization, stood as the epitome of human achievement. From the Great Wall to the Forbidden City, from Confucian scholars to emperors draped in silk and gold, Imperial China seemed eternal. Yet, history is never kind to the complacent. Beneath the surface of grandeur lay a rotting Qing empire, strangled by internal corruption, foreign invasions, and the sheer weight of its own traditions. By the late Ming Dynasty, signs of collapse were everywhere. The once mighty bureaucracy was riddled with bribery. Scholars who should have advised the emperor were instead lining their own pockets. Farmers, the backbone of China, faced crushing taxes and famine. In 1628, a man named Li Ziqing rose from the ashes of poverty, leading peasant revolts that shook the empire. The imperial treasury was empty, the emperors weak, and the soldiers poorly equipped. Natural disasters compounded the chaos. Massive floods and droughts ravaged crops, leading to starvation and mass migration. In some provinces, famine was so severe that people were forced to eat tree bark, weeds, or even the dead. Imagine an empire that built the largest cities in the world, yet could not feed its own people. This is the brutal reality of a crumbling dynasty. Corruption was not just a moral failing, it was a weapon of mass destruction. Officials often embezzled funds meant for disaster relief, hoarded food, or sold government positions to the highest bidder. The civil service exams, once a pillar of meritocracy, became an arena for bribery. The result? Inept administrators, disillusioned citizens, and a government that had lost touch with reality. Even emperors fell victim to corruption. Many were more interested in lavish banquets and palace intrigues than governing effectively. By the late Ming, some emperors spent their entire reign behind the walls of the Forbidden City, insulated from the suffering outside. The people starved, armies mutinied, and provinces slipped into rebellion. It was a slow-motion disaster, but nobody inside. The palace seemed to notice as internal decay festered. Foreign powers sensed weakness. The Portuguese, Dutch, and later the British carved out trading posts along China's coasts. These intrusions, combined with the introduction of opium by British merchants, destabilized the economy and inflamed social unrest. Opium addiction spread like wildfire, draining silver from the economy and leaving millions addicted, desperate and destitute. The Qing Dynasty, which replaced the Ming, faced similar pressures. Initially strong, the Qing expanded China's territory like never before. But the sheer size of the empire became a liability. Rebellions like the White Lotus and Taiping Rebellion tore through the countryside, killing tens of millions. Cities burned, farmland lay fallow, and the government proved incapable of responding effectively. No event symbolizes the collapse of Imperial China more than the Taiping Rebellion, led by Hong Xiuquan, a man who claimed to be the younger brother of Jesus Christ. This rebellion was part religious crusade, part social revolution. Millions joined his army, promising land reform, equality, and a new heavenly kingdom. The rebellion was brutal. Entire cities were destroyed, families wiped out, and famine followed in its wake. Some estimates put the death toll at 20 to 30 million people, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. And yet, the Qing government remained ineffective, relying on mercenaries and foreign powers to finally suppress the revolt. This internal chaos left China vulnerable to foreign exploitation for decades to come. The collapse wasn't only internal. Foreign powers exposed China's military weaknesses in the 19th century. The Opium Wars humiliated the Qing Dynasty. British warships, armed with industrial-age artillery, easily defeated Chinese forces that still relied on outdated weapons. China was forced into signing unequal treaties, ceding territory like Hong Kong, opening ports to foreign trade, and paying massive reparations. The concept of sovereignty was shattered. A nation that had once dominated East Asia now bowed to European powers. Imagine centuries of empire reduced to humiliation by a few dozen warships. It was a symbolic and psychological blow from which China would struggle to recover. Nationalism and desperation led to the Boxer Rebellion, a violent uprising against foreign influence and Christian missionaries. The Boxers, mostly peasants, believed that through ritual and belief, they could make themselves immune to bullets. Cities burned, foreigners were massacred, and entire communities were obliterated. Yet again, the Qing government proved ineffectual, and foreign powers intervened, brutally crushing the rebellion. The humiliation deepened, the empire's legitimacy eroded, and the people's faith in the emperor waned. By the turn of the 20th century, Imperial China was a shadow of its former glory, riddled with debt, weakened militarily, and divided politically. Reformers tried to save the empire. The self-strengthening movement attempted to modernize the military and industrial base. Railways were built, arsenals constructed, and Western technologies adopted. But the reforms were too little, too late. Conservative forces resisted change, fearing that modernization would undermine Confucian order and their own power. By the early 20th century, Emperor Guangxu attempted the 100 Days Reform, aiming to modernize education, government, and military systems, but conservative forces, led by Empress Dowager Cixi, swiftly crushed these reforms. Reformers were executed, ideas buried, and the empire remained paralyzed by fear of change. By 1911, the cracks could no longer be hidden. Widespread famine, corruption, foreign intrusion, and failed reforms set the stage for revolution. The Wuchang Uprising sparked nationwide rebellion, and within months, the Qing Dynasty, the last imperial dynasty of China, collapsed. Emperor Py, the last emperor, was forced to abdicate at the age of 6, marking the end of over 2,000 years of dynastic rule. The centuries-long cycle of emperors, mandarins, and dynastic power ended not with a heroic battle, but with political decay, social upheaval, and the inability of an empire to adapt. The collapse of Imperial China left chaos in its wake. Warlords carved up the country, foreign powers controlled trade and territory, and millions suffered famine and disease. For decades, China struggled to find stability. The psychological impact was as severe as the physical. Millions had to accept that their once great empire was no longer invincible. Yet in the ruined seeds of modern China were planted. Nationalist movements, communist uprisings, and reformist ideas began to take root. Out of destruction came the vision of a new China, but it would take nearly half a century of turmoil, war, and revolution to fully emerge. The story of Imperial China is a story of human fragility. Even the greatest empires can crumble under the weight of corruption, stagnation, and external pressures. It's a reminder that power is not eternal, and history is unforgiving to those who fail to adapt. Empires rise, civilizations flourish, and yet the lessons of the past remain clear. Neglect your people, ignore change, and even the mightiest dragons will fall. What do you think was the single biggest cause of Imperial China's collapse? Internal corruption, foreign invasion, or failed reform? Comment below, I want to know your thoughts. If you found this story as shocking as I did, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more brutal, eye-opening history you won't learn in school.